As a reader of classic comic books, it's a given to me that when you read an old comic book, it helps to put yourself in the mindset of the culture of the time period. 1960s superhero comic books don't make any darn sense in the 2020s. You have to sort of imagine what were the cultural attitudes and the values of the time period back then. What were the concerns? What were the things that they cared about? That stuff helps make a comic book make sense. And as somebody who reads comic books going back to the 1930s, it's something I've learned how to do pretty much automatically when I read. So imagine my surprise when I was recently rereading Captain America No More, a 1980s storyline spanning from Captain America 332 through 350 that reads more true to life today than it did when it was published 4 decades ago. Captain America No More was written in the late stages of the Reagan administration between 1987 and 1988, at which time two very different ideas were both true about Reagan and his presidential administration. On the one hand, they were experiencing immense public popularity and support. And on the other, they were dealing with something known as the Iran-Contra scandal, in which it had come to light that high-ranking members of the administration, possibly Reagan himself, had been involved in some seriously morally questionable and definitely illegal activities. The surprising part was not that a presidential administration was involved in breaking the law. Let's be honest, that's probably happened more often than we know. The surprising part was how much they embraced it and how much the public embraced them as a result. A key figure in this was Oliver North, a man who had essentially taken the rap for his higher-ups, buried and destroyed a lot of evidence, and become a national hero as a result. There were people who said that Oliver North was the greatest patriot in America because he had sacrificed his own career to protect the president and the president's higher-ups. That's a very different idea of patriotism than what Captain America stood for. And that's a large part of what Mark Gruenwald was trying to explore in this storyline, in which Oliver North doesn't appear. And it's not until late in the storyline that any criticism of Reagan himself actually come into play. By the way, if you're a Reagan fan, this is not a political video. It's just trying to understand the background of the story. But what it does do instead is it pits Captain America against John Walker, a very different kind of patriot who essentially takes Captain America's place. The background of this is that Mark Gruenwald had a cover for Captain America a little bit earlier on, in which Captain America was carrying a gun. It was supposed to be done for shock value and to get readers to, buy a copy, but some readers really latched onto this idea of Captain America becoming more of a Punisher-type avenging figure who was willing to cross lines and violate moral codes in order to protect what he believed in. Well, Gruenwald was very big on symbolism with Captain America, and what Captain America stood for, he was never going to stand for that. But he did instead get the idea of possibly giving Captain America a break and letting somebody else step in his shoes. Somebody who might fire a gun and kill without question. Somebody who might be more of an Oliver North and be willing to violate his own personal code of conduct and ethics in order to protect his higher-ups. Somebody who was the other idea of a super patriot that was garnering interest and attention in the United States at the time. Had Captain America become irrelevant to 1980s United States? That's a large part of what this storyline was asking. So what actually happens in the storyline is Captain America shows up one day at a government office with some serious grievances about things the United States government seems to be sanctioning. Specifically, they're dealing with the power broker, a very seedy, morally gray criminal, to get super soldier serum for some of their agents and operatives. And Captain America alerts a higher-up and basically says, I have concerns about this, and is told he's too sensitive and to let it go. You'd think that would be the beginning of where this whole storyline goes. The cover certainly seems to suggest that's what is the impetus for Captain America essentially turning in his shield, that there's blood being shed, there are serious violations of ethical conduct occurring. That's not where it goes. Whether Gruenwald had a change of opinion, or the cover is just extra dramatic, or what, that part of the storyline kind of goes away. We see Captain America a little more distrustful of the government he works for, but beyond that, ready to move on, until some FBI folks show up and pull Captain America in for a meeting with a secret commission appointed by the president to oversee superpowered beings in the United States of America. This is at the same time in Marvel Comics, the Mutant Registration Act is becoming a huge thing. There's a whole question of what role government should play in overseeing superpowered beings in the United States of America. So this could have been a part of that too, but it wasn't. Instead, this government agency has just decided out of nowhere that they expect Captain America to stop being a free agent and start working for them again. After all, the American government created Captain America. The agreement was he was going to be a sort of mascot for the United States, and that's what they want him to do again. Give up everything else he's doing and work exclusively for them and only do what they say to do. Captain America takes a moment to think about that, 24 hours exactly, and decides that's not what he wants to do. He works for America, not the American government, which kind of seems like it should have been the big dramatic reveal at the end of this story arc. Instead, it's what begins it. So, Captain America walks away and stops being Captain America. Now, Marvel had done something like this before. In fact, they've done it many times before. In an age in which they were no longer allowed to really significantly change their characters, there was an unofficial status quo for marketing and licensing purposes. Cartoons and TV series had to align. So there was this idea, supposedly coined by Stan Lee, of the illusion of change. Create a sense that something huge has changed as long as it resets in the end. And they'd put Spider-Man in a black alien costume for a time being, and people flipped and it got them lots of sales, and eventually he went back to the regular one. They had Iron Man replaced in the armor by a different character, James Rhodes, a different Iron Man. And that got a lot of attention and a lot of sales, and eventually they reset things back again. Well, this time around they decided to do both at the same time. Let's put the original Captain America in a new black costume. He's now the captain, operating outside the jurisdiction of the United States government. And let's also replace the original Captain America with a totally new guy. That in itself might have made for an interesting storyline, but Mark Gruenwald wanted to go further. He had a lot to say about what was happening in America right now, about what patriotism really was and wasn't. And so, who he chooses to play the new Captain America is the most fascinating, memorable, and important part of this entire storyline. It's the part that really speaks to me in 2025. See, John Walker appears in the MCU. You've probably seen the movies and TV shows in which he appears. It should not need to be said, but what happens in the movies and TV shows is usually not the same as what happened in the comic books. So in the movies and TV shows, he's a more over-the-top, violent, Punisher type dude, and that might have been Mark Gruenwald's original idea for him, but that's not the character we got in the comics. John Walker is a polite, respectful, good-natured guy who believes in his country, believes in doing what he's told, and truly and honestly wants to do right and live up to Captain America's legacy. In the first few issues, he is unquestionably just a good farm boy from Georgia. And it really is his upbringing that sets him apart as different. Whereas Captain America, the original, Steve Rogers, grew up in Bronx, New York. Growing up in Georgia instead, John Walker's been introduced to a very different culture. He's been immersed in a culture that's given him some very different values. So in one of his first storylines, probably the most memorable one, he's forced to go after a vigilante terrorist hate group that's functioning in his hometown in Georgia. And the disturbing part is, he realizes he agrees with everything they stand for. They are committing acts of terror, and in one case, cold-blooded murder, to make America the evangelical Christian ideal that they want it to be. So whenever somebody deviates from that ideal in whatever way, whether it be having books in libraries that they don't agree with, whether it be Planned Parenthood endorsement, whether it be pornography, they're there with torches and bombs and violence to make sure it gets silenced. And John Walker is like, I agree with all that stuff. And it's clearly implied that had Walker not become Captain America, he might very well have joined this group. So when he goes head-to-head with these people he actually agrees with, it makes for some very interesting ideological exploration. More interesting still, even though Walker himself is not a racist, the group that he is fighting against but secretly agrees with very clearly is racist. There's a point where Walker's partner, his best friend Lemar, Bucky originally, later on Battlestar, sets himself up to be captured by these people just by posing as a black man auditioning white models. That's enough to get their attention. They kidnap Lemar, and they're about to lynch him. And in a very disturbing moment, John Walker, in one of his first missions, still green, still not sure what to do, has to choose between rescuing his best friend, who might survive a hanging with his super soldier serum in him, or going after the other bad guys and finishing his assignments, like the government told him to do. Walker leaves his best friend to be hanged. It's a haunting and disturbing moment. Lemar himself is not bothered by it, but you can tell it really messes with Walker. And he begins wondering, did the government intentionally put him in a situation where he had to make such a choice? More disturbing for us still, it's a reminder that Walker sympathizes with these people and doesn't see a contradiction in the fact that they're willing to lynch his best friend for being black while it's his best friend. It's really interesting. Walker quickly becomes more interesting than that still, because in this can't be an accident, there are far too many scenes and panels in those early issues where Walker and Lemar are naked together, looking at each other while talking naked together, and in some cases, even more is implied than that. Frederick Wortham would have had a field day with this, but it's constantly implied over and over again that these men are either gay or in denial about being gay, which makes Walker, the good boy from Georgia, even more complex. His best friend and possibly gay lover is black, while he believes in Southern Evangelical Christianity. It's fascinating stuff. Honestly, even though Steve Rogers is really still supposed to be the heart of the series, and there are entire issues where Walker doesn't show up, he really becomes the part that's fascinating to me, because it's an attempt by Gruenwald to understand the Americans he doesn't agree with. He is very clearly, though he says nowhere in here, a liberal. He very clearly holds on to democratic values in a way that wasn't being embraced by the Reagan administration. He clearly doesn't trust or like the Reagan administration, though he tones down his criticism of it until very late in the series. But what's interesting is instead of making Walker just a human nightmare, just a clear conservative bad guy, he really tries to understand Walker and present a sympathetic view of him, and puts Walker on a journey of self-discovery where Walker might eventually begin to figure out what parts of his identity don't match the values he was originally given. Really interesting stuff. Walker is repeatedly placed in situations where he doesn't get a fair chance. It's a very real depiction of somebody trying to become a public profile superhero. The friends and shady agent who originally helped get him there are now resentful of the fact that he is Captain America and they are not, and they blackmail him. And Walker tries to handle it and handles it horribly and ends up accidentally, seriously injuring one of them. He's placed in situations where he feels like he has to lie to save his reputation, but then chooses to tell the truth because he keeps getting thrown in more morally questionable, ambiguous, problematic situations that he doesn't know how to get out of. Situations in which Steve Rogers in the early days might not have even known how to cope with. While all this is happening, Steve Rogers is off on the side, still dealing with his own issues as well. Debating, should he have stood up to the government more? Or even, is he crazy? If everybody else seems to think this administration is so great, maybe he's the one who's wrong. How does he continue to defend America's values when America's government doesn't always stand for those values? So he becomes the captain, this black-clad version of Captain America, ably supported by a really fun ensemble cast, including Nomad, including Falcon, including D-Man, who's really, really fun. I really love that guy. And we rotate out a fourth character too. Sometimes it's Nomad's girlfriend. Sometimes it's the villain Diamondback, who's got sort of a Catwoman-Batman relationship with Captain America, the bad girl who kind of sort of wants to go good. It's good storytelling, and they end up in prison no less than 2 times because the government doesn't recognize them anymore, and Captain America insists on still following rule and order, even while government enforcement neither respects them nor even gives them their due process in civil rights. It's interesting. But John Walker remains the most fun part of this whole thing. Eventually, the situations he's thrown into begin to add up and pile up more and more. Things get more and more complicated to the point that some of his original buddies who are still resentful over the fact that he has sold them out to become Captain America publicize his real identity to the world. And some of his other enemies, remember that hate group that he partially took down, use that information to kidnap his parents. And that's when John Walker becomes a lot more and a lot less interesting in this Captain America run. See, when we finally meet John Walker's parents, they're essentially Ma and Pa Kent. It's hard to miss the parallel. They're farmers, they're sweet, good-natured, simple folk, and they didn't even know their son was Captain America now. So they've been kidnapped. They've got guns held to their heads. And John Walker's feeling responsible for this. No, Superman didn't have to deal with this dilemma early on, but somehow he has to. And he's not sure what to do. It becomes clear very fast that they're going to kill him and then kill his parents. So he makes a bold gambit. The kind of thing you'd expect any superhero to do in that situation, where the odds are 1,000,000 to 1, but you gotta try for it. And surprise, surprise, the 1,000,000 to 1 gamble doesn't pay off. His parents are gunned down right in front of him, mercilessly. And John snaps. At that point, he becomes the character fans have been asking for all along. And probably the character Gruenwald originally envisioned. A cold-blooded killer who has no code of ethics, has no rules, has no law. As long as he's following the rules of his superiors and getting the people that he considers to be bad, he doesn't care how many rules he violates, how many ethics he complicates, how many lines he crosses. He just becomes the Punisher in a Captain America costume. It's interesting. It's very interesting. It also ends our exploration of a character I truly want to understand better. The character who supports a president who violates the law, a president who blatantly and flagrantly seems to have no respect for the edicts and tenets upon which the country was built. I want to understand that character more and what would happen as he evolves and grows and has to take more responsibility for his belief system. Gruenwald cut that short for whatever reason. Fortunately, there's a lot of other good going on in that storyline as well. The Serpent Society shows up, and it is a really exciting storyline in which Viper attempts to turn all of Washington, D.C. into lizard people. It's a bit ridiculous, but man, the battle is intense. Some of those action sequences are so disturbing, I'm surprised they got passed by the American Comics Code. And essentially, it ends with Gruenwald's weirdest moment in the series. Prior to this point, he's avoided talking about Reagan entirely. In fact, this commission appointed by Reagan might be doing so without Reagan's knowledge, and Captain America considers that numerous times. Reagan finally turns into one of the lizard people, and the depiction of both him and Nancy Reagan is beyond disrespectful. It goes a little bit far. And the original Captain America, Steve Rogers, ends up saving Reagan by the end of the issue, only to have Reagan appear on TV the next day, acting like nothing happened, it's all under control, not thanking Captain America at all, and it gives a sense of hopelessness finally. That the guy at the top that we hoped maybe might be above all of this and might do right, either is on the side of evil, or more likely is a really good actor and doesn't really care or understand what's happening. It's a hollow, disturbing smile he has at the end of that issue. Well, Gruenwald either second-guessed himself or got yelled at by somebody, because he then changes course tremendously, and that's where this series kind of goes south. Several issues later, Captain America 348, Reagan shows up out of nowhere to play the Deus Ex Machina to both John Walker and Steve Rogers' dilemmas. He gets the commission to reinstate Steve Rogers as Captain America and to not press charges against John Walker for going over the line and needlessly and horrifically killing a lot of bad guys. It ties things up a bit too neatly. And if that wasn't enough, John Walker, who it seemed like from the beginning was fated to meet a very tragic, powerful, moving end, just goes up to Captain America and hands him the shield, and it's a passing of the torch back again. It short circuits where it really shouldn't. And so I'd say the last issue of that run, I might even almost skip. But everything the story was doing up to that point, especially prior to the moment where John Walker's parents die, is a fascinating exploration of what it is to live in America where we're not sure the government aligns well with the ideals of the country, and where we have a nation divided with two very different groups of people who have two very different ideas of patriotism. And for the most part, instead of just slamming one side and exonerating the other, Gruenwald really tries to explore the other point of view and understand it. He ultimately comes short of doing that, but for a good long time, John Walker was a fascinating exploration of what it means to be a conservative from the heartland who actually wants to do good. If this conversation went a little too political for you, I apologize. I'm trying really hard not to insert my own politics into this, but it's a political story, and we live in a political time. I'm somebody who generally wants to turn off the news when it gets too dark. I'm informed, I know what's happening, but I don't revel in it, and I certainly avoid political discourse about it and all that stuff. But this storyline spoke to me, and what I really saw in it more than anything else was a call to try to understand the other side, which I think is what America needs if it's going to heal. It really does. So whether you want to see Reagan made fun of crying mommy, mommy on the floor, or whether you want to understand the people who voted for and exonerated him when clear wrongdoing was present, this is a storyline worth considering. It really, really, really is. And if you're somebody who would have supported Reagan back then, maybe somebody who supports Trump and MAGA today, you might find John Walker a fascinating change of pace for a superhero. Somebody who thinks differently, comes from a different set of values, and who has a writer who isn't afraid to show him as somebody with a good heart trying to do the best he can. However you want to take it, Captain America No More from Captain America number 332 through 350 is a fascinating exploration, one well worth checking out, and I hope you will. It's been collected in several places. I know there's a trade paperback known as The Captain. I know there are trade paperbacks collecting all of Mark Gruenwald's work on Captain America, but honestly, I was able to fish most of these out of a dollar bin. They're not comics people look for anymore, which is a shame. So I strongly recommend checking out the storyline, checking out John Walker, and please, once you do, hit me up in the comments and tell me what you thought of the story. Truly, it gave me a lot to think about. It affected me in a way that most comic books don't, and I hope it will for you as well. Have a great one. If you have a chance, check out our other playlists. Remember, we've got Beyond Transformers, we've got classic chiller films, we've got the CCF in Depth podcast, and of course, we'll have a lot more here for you soon as well. See you next time. In the meantime, stay weird.